A big part of winning at retail is understanding what motivates consumers to buy. It's a topic that has gotten increasingly complex now that retail spans so many different channels. One man has made it his life's work to go deep and get inside the mind of the consumer. Meet Paco Underhill, founder and former CEO of Envirocell, a behavioral research and consulting firm that tests prototype stores as well as monitoring consumer behavior on websites and in brick-and-mortar stores. In this episode of A Seat at the Table, Paco discusses how fashion has evolved into what he refers to as uniforms and costumes, the new influences on women's choice of career wear, and shifts in how consumers shop, and some best practices in how retailers can respond. So let's sit down with Paco and try and make sense of today's fast-changing retail market. Well, first of all, I want to thank you very much for joining me on A Seat at the Table. It's really a pleasure to have you here, and I'm very excited to get into your point of view on what you see happening at retail and with just the general, I would say, shift in consumer attitudes as you see it.
Okay. All right. First of all, we are finally moving from the 20th century analog world to a 21st century digital world. And as we talked about the day before yesterday, that if you think of it, in the 1960s, there was a Singer sewing machine that existed in the garment district here in New York. And over the next, in effect, 50 years or 60 years, that sewing machine has migrated to the lowest labor cost around the world. So starting in New York, going to Mexico, then to Haiti, then to China, then to Vietnam, and finally ending up in Bangladesh. Each point along the way, it got farther and farther away from the end consumer. And it was fueled by both labor cost, but also balancing labor cost and transportation cost. One of the challenges which this gave to the fashion industry is that it had to predict where fashion was going to go at least 6 months in advance. Okay. And part of what we know, Jane, from the world that both you and I have occupied in is that not only did it sometimes succeed, but it sometimes failed, which is what created, outlet malls and stuff like that to be able to deal with whatever the remnants of last year's versus, what was hot this year and it's out of stock. One of the things that we know is that one of the pioneers of getting past this was Zara and Mango, who did a very, very nice job of being able to report not only what was selling, but what wasn't selling, and be able to fulfill some of those supply chains really, really well. And part of what I think they were also pioneers is the concept of what is global and what is local. And I think this is particularly for fashion, has been the recognition that Paris, London, and New York no longer rule. They may influence, but they no longer rule. Fashion isn't dictated from some central location, and it isn't dictated necessarily by the fashion houses in Milan or in Paris. But part of what we know from our world is that there are dresses that will fly off the floor in Dallas that nobody will touch in Philadelphia.
True.
And that trade-off here between global and local is one of the challenges that the major department store and fashion chains have had to deal with, which is, how do I understand the local market? And how do I respond to the local market? And it could be everything from sizing to color to the nature of conservatism. But in that exiting of Paris and London, part of what that's also opened up is the world of influencers, and that social media has been something where the fashion trends not only are passed down, but fashion trends are passed up. Okay. And I think that is really interesting. And it is true whether you're in Dallas or in Philadelphia, or you're in Wuhan or in Shanghai, is that there are fundamental changes there. We also know that the world of what we wear has gone through some shifts, fueled in part, I again, by the explosion of our digital world, but also some of just the changing climate of uniforms and costumes.
Could you unpack that a bit? I know you had mentioned that when we spoke the other day. So perhaps you can just explain what you mean by uniforms and what you mean by costumes and how you see that impacting fashion nowadays.
Well, let's recognize something. One of the fundamental shifts in our broader global landscape is the changing status of women. Okay. And that as women are now more than 60% of the graduates of institutions of higher learning, and that if you look at New York, London, Paris, Dallas, even Tokyo, and you look at a 27-year-old working person, the chances are that that person, if they're female, is making more money than the man. Is there a glass ceiling? The answer is yes. But part of what this has meant is that the professions that women are going into have gotten eminently broader, meaning that they're going into law, they're going into insurance, they're going into business. And part of what this means is that there's a shift in terms of fashion, which is that when you go in to a conservative business, your role is to blend in, not to stand out. So if you are working at a fashion house or a fashion magazine, you can express your style in a much different way. But if you're going into a law office, yes, there are repertoires in terms of your shoes and your jewelry, which are yours, but just the role of the uniform. And the uniform governs much of what we wear Monday through Friday. And whether it's the uniform that I go to work, or it's the uniform I go to work out in, or it's the uniform that I go meet my friends on a Thursday night versus what I choose to wear on Saturday night. And if I go into your closet, Jane, there are things that were bought for everyday use, and there were things that were bought for a special occasion. You were going to a wedding. You were going on vacation. You were going to see an old friend who you hadn't seen in 25 years and wanted to look your best. I mean, but those are that shift in terms of it's also to a certain extent true about boys. And that sense of uniforms. Part of what happens also here is that once we reach age 40, we've sort of decided on what works for us. And I won't say I wear the same clothes, but I wear a uniform, I would say 90% of the time, meaning that shirt, t-shirt, pants, I look good in it, but am I wearing hip hop fashion? The answer is no. So I think part of what you were looking at here in terms of uniforms and costumes is a definition of both what your personal style is and what your personal comfort is. But it's also a tribute to the fact that the broader marketplace for fashion, particularly in North America and in Western Europe and in the wealthier parts of Asia, is settling in on a mature audience.
Right. So you're looking at uniforms as what we wear in order to blend in, or in order to, in a sense, look like we're part of whatever environment we're in, whether it be our office setting or whether it be our social group. In that case, how would you define a costume?
Costume is something where I am going to an occasion where I have permission to be able to be something else. And where I'm looking to make a statement that I may not want to make on a Tuesday night. And this is not only about what we wear, but in terms of the world of beauty, it's how much cosmetics that I'm putting on, and what's my jewelry, what kind of shoes am I wearing, am I going to wear those 6-inch stilettos on a Tuesday night? The answer is probably no. I think this is also in a younger generation, okay, as we deal with urbanization. I have noticed that in my own life, my young stepdaughters who live in New York City are very cognizant about riding the subway. And therefore, the things that would be permissible in Texas, okay, if I'm driving my car to wherever I'm going versus riding the subway, are things that they have learned to be careful about, and my hat's off to them for it.
So then when you're looking at some of these shifts that you see happening, whether they be demographics or psychographics, depends upon how you want to frame it, how do you see that impacting then retail in general?
Well, I think there are a number of things going on that are happening above the radar screen, and there are things that are happening just under the radar screen. Just under the radar screen, for example, the concept of vintage or the concept of recycling. That this is something that we have gone from, oh, I have to shop those stores, to I can shop those stores. And the idea that recycled clothing is perfectly acceptable reminds me, Jane, of that victory that Walmart and Target won in the late 1980s and 90s, where it was no longer shameful to be caught on the parking lot. Think about it here. I mean, there was a generation of us where, if you were caught in the parking lot of Walmart, you were confessing that you were, what your economic circumstances are. But Target, Walmart, did a terrific job. Kmart, I might point out too, in terms of their marketing efforts, did of making it permissible for us to be able to do something. Second theme here is, as our factories get more digital and get closer to the customer, I can go to Seoul, for example, and there are things that are constructed in the back room, meaning that the distance between you and where it's going from a roll of fabric to something that I'm going to wear is no longer tens of thousands of miles, but could be a matter of meters. The other theme here, which is, I think, a really fascinating one, is the role of body scanning, meaning that it is possible now for you to have a body scan of yourself and, in effect, have a personal shopper that understands you and that understands your shape, your dimensions, and your closet, and therefore can act in a way as a personal shopper in a way that is going to transform how we choose to consume.
I think that'll be interesting, especially around the push towards greater personalization, where people are looking to have something that's a little more special rather than simply buying quantity as we used to.
I think it's also being able to go in and go, I would really like to have a pair of jeans, but the idea that those jeans could be customized to fit exactly my waist and my dimensions and the length of my legs and whatever is something that is very positive and fits into that uniform culture too.
How do you see that fitting into that uniform culture?
Well, some of it is that this personal assistant is going to, one, get things to fit better. It's also going to help you manage your closet. And that concept of managing your closet, while some of us do it really, really well, there are others of us that do it reasonably poorly. And how often have we bought something, taken it home, and went, why did I buy this?
That's true.
Or go into your closet and go, I bought that and I've worn it 3 times in 5 years.
Yeah, it's sad, but that is really the truth for so many people, myself included.
And I think one of the trends which I hope we're going to get to is, as that moves forward, is getting to fewer, better things.
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business Who hasn't had their tunnel of year? This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
I would agree with you. I think that we're definitely seeing a shift. It's a slow one, but certainly a shift from more is more to fewer is better.
I
And
think so
preferably
too.
not only fewer is better, but what you're buying, you're hopefully, because you're buying fewer, you are able to buy better quality. Now, if you
Do
were to
you
have one thing that you would advise people who were running retail operations today, what would your best advice be?
First of all, I think one of the things about retail apparel, okay, is recognizing that the average time spent in a dressing room is up by almost 20%.
Oh, is it really?
And this is as people use Snapchat and
Right.
FaceTime to be able to, and that part of what I think is very important in the apparel retail world is to understand the complete store, okay? To understand the social dynamics of people walking in the door, okay? And to recognize that finding a way to create a community is one of the ways that you cement your relationship with your customer. I love the fact that some Japanese stores have programs where if you buy a dress, you are given the option of sending pictures of yourself in that dress, which are then played inside the store.
Oh, nice.
Okay. And that role of creating community here is one that I think is very exciting.
Yes, I think that's very interesting. What are some of the things that you see happening in addition to this around shopper experience? Because experience has become such a buzzword these days.
Well, I think this is also one of the challenges that we face. And this is, again, one of the topics that as a researcher, we have spent an enormous amount of time over the past 10 years, is what is the difference between the experienced shopper and the inexperienced shopper? Meaning that if I'm a beauty site or I'm a fashion site, what's the difference between somebody who's there for the first time versus somebody who's there for the 101st time?
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you have conclusions on that?
Well, I think one of the topics here is that there isn't a ubiquitous answer. And even whether you're selling fashion or you're selling technology, that it's driven sometimes by age, sometimes by location,
Right.
but it's also being driven by familiarity.
Right.
And that digital literacy and affluence don't always walk hand in hand.
Yeah, that's true. So generally speaking, then, from your research in studying people who are visiting websites, are there key takeaways that you've found?
Well, I think one of the things I think is really interesting is that so much of digital research is based on clickstream data. Okay.
Okay.
And that is often the parallel that I point to here is that clickstream data and sales data are often analogous. It is, if I think about sales data, it is looking at the functionality of a store from the vantage point of the cash register. And that one of the key aspects to understanding digital isn't just understanding what people are doing, it's what they aren't doing that you'd like them to do. Okay. We have a tool that we have used called WebAlarm, and which is patented, which is a software package that when a digital client comes to us, we recruit a cross-section of people.
Right.
And load our software package onto their laptops and their phones, and it lets us look at and talk to somebody as they shop online.
Oh, that's very interesting.
And it has been a remarkably effective tool to be able to look at the language, the images, the whatever, and the web designers have gone from being threatened by it to loving it because often we can make a very subtle shift and see the results almost immediately.
Wow, that's incredible.
It's
So you
fun. It's
so
fun.
you're actually someone is shopping and you're able to sort of ping them and start having a conversation with them?
Yes, exactly.
Oh my
I,
gosh.
I, I mean, part of what this is that we will recruit people, and we'll recruit a novice user and an expert user, and we may do 50 or 60 of them. And if we're working for one beauty company, let's say, okay, that we're sending them, we will ask them to go to our client site, but we'll also ask them to go to competitor sites and be able to look at some of the differences there in the technology thing, particularly with telecoms here. Understanding what people see and how they see something is just really it's something where if I took one of my clients from Seattle or Silicon Valley and we had a couple of beers together, they would tell you that they get more from 30 web-alongs from us than they do looking at the clickstream data from 10,000 people.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I think that's something that everyone wants to get their hands on because everyone is really trying to decode what's happening online and being able to analyze the data in a way that they really understand where, where the opportunities are. I think there's a lot of things that can be measured online, but not all of that is giving people
Jane,
the right conclusions.
Part of what we're looking at is a better meeting of art and science. And I
Okay.
think there are lots of us, from people in the AI world to whatever, that are trying to get to that goal.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is really overwhelming because you can get so much data, but that data is not necessarily meaningful towards leading you to the right decision or the right insight. So picking out what's important and setting the right benchmarks is foundational and yet very difficult to achieve.
Part of what we're looking at is, in the 21st century, collecting data is really easy. Figuring out what the hell you do with it is a lot tougher.
Yes,
And
very well said.
one of the things which I relished as a refugee from the world of academia is that stepping off into the world of commercial research as opposed to academic research, people didn't care how big your database was. They cared about whether you could use it in a way that created a difference.
Right.
And that meant that, the line between quantitative and qualitative was yes, it was there, but it was fuzzier. And if
Right.
I could come in and go, here are 5 things you can do tomorrow, then people are a lot more willing, if those 5 things made a difference, to be able to look at the 5 things that I suggested them doing, in a month or next year.
Yeah, I think that's really the key. People are
Mhm.
looking to say, how does this lead to something that's actionable?
True, true, very, very true.
So in terms of shop along, then this is specifically to be able to track what consumers are doing online and in real time get feedback.
Well, we call it a web along here. Okay,
Okay.
yes, a web along, and it's a patented process. And yeah, it's a very interesting tool that sort of mimics the work that we also did in store, which is to do a shop along where we would
Right.
go shopping with somebody and talk to them and ask them questions while they move through the store.
Yeah, I think that kind of customer research is invaluable. And it's a shame that a lot of brands and retailers don't really want to do that. Or I don't know if they don't want to do it, but they don't do it. Because, like you said, you really start to fill in the black holes in the information that you're getting, because typically you're only collecting data based on what people did, right? What they bought, what item they
Well,
bought, what size. You don't know why they didn't buy what they didn't buy.
I think part of what we're looking at is that the broader world of retail and fashion design has become more of a collaborative art form.
Right.
Okay? And I think that is in part based on the fact that the fashion design world is no longer dominated by men. It's dominated. It is a co-mingling of genders and interests here, and Therefore, there is less ego and more delight being put into the process.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, the fact that we have so many, that we've really had a resurgence, you might say, of indie brands. Whereas I think we went from having a lot of indie brands maybe a generation ago, to having everything being more or less aggregated under a few, massive brands, maybe national brands or international brands. And now a lot of it, because they could sell online, we have seen a proliferation of, like you're saying, brands that are smaller brands, collaborative brands, brands doing something very different, not following key trends. So yes, I think that's an interesting point you bring up.
Well, I think also part of what it means is that we have the chance to be able to step away from cotton and wool and get to, bamboo and alpaca.
Right. Yeah, I think that in a sense, there's probably never been a greater opportunity for individuals to come into this field and be able to carve out at least a small niche for themselves.
Well, I think the 20th century, Jane, was about technology letting us get big.
Right.
And one of the things about the 21st century is that technology is often letting us get smaller or letting us get more local.
I think that's a very good point, because you're right. In the 20th century, technology was really something only massive companies could tap into because it was very expensive and very complex to use. Whereas now it's become simplified and less expensive to the point where, as you're pointing out, everyone can afford to have not the exact same applications, but pretty much the same.
True.
Where can people learn more about Webalong? I think that a lot of people listening to this would be very, very interested in learning more about that particular service.
Well, you can always reach out to me personally here at Paco Underhill or Paco at invirusel.com, or
Okay.
you can go to pacounderhill.com, or you can go to invirusel.com.
All right. Well, I'm going to put all of those links in the show notes. And
Okay.
I want to thank you so much, Paco, for taking the time to join me here today and for sharing so many interesting views with myself and our audience here.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Jane. It is always a pleasure to talk to you.